Hey Physique Freaks, how's it going? Scott Tuzana, MetabolicMasterpiece.com. Today we're going to focus on the hamstrings and maximizing those aesthetic muscle gains. Now, if you're relying on just the squat and the deadlift to build up your hamstrings, you're leaving some serious results on the table. In order to maximize those gains, you need to include some exercises that involve a hip hinge movement, as well as exercises that cause a flexion at the knee. We're going to get to some examples of those exercises. These are exercises that I'm including in this phase of my training. It's a 5-day full body routine, so I'm using each of these exercises throughout the week to really ensure that I am targeting and stimulating as many different muscle fibers within my hamstrings as I possibly can. Now, it's important to note that the hamstring it crosses the two joints, your knee and your hips, all except the short head of the bicep femoris. So that's the reason why it's really important that you include some knee flexion exercises as well as hip hinge exercises to stimulate all those muscle fibers within the hamstrings. Let's get to those examples. And we're going to begin with the hip hinge exercises, which activate the upper aspect of the hamstring. This is the Romanian Deadlift. I prefer to use this T-bar apparatus. It just feels more comfortable to me than a barbell. So with hip hinge movements, you're driving those hips back as far as you can get them. Nice soft bend in the knee. Contract those hamstrings, squeeze the glutes, and thrust your hips forward. It's really important to note that when you're driving those hips back, as soon as you reach that point where you can't go back any further, do not flex at the trunk in order to get that weight any lower. That's just going to get more lower back involvement, and you don't want that. You want to keep all the tension on the hamstrings. Next up is the good morning. It's a very, very similar movement. You see those hips going back, nice soft knees, just going back as far as you can. No extra flexing at the trunk there. You get to that point where the hips reach their end point. Squeeze those glutes, squeeze those hamstrings, drive those hips forward. The only difference between these movements is the physics. So here you got the barbell on top of your shoulder compared to the resistance being down lower with that T-bar apparatus, or even if you're using a barbell. So just the resistance is going to feel a little bit different, a little slight difference in the feel and tension, but all in all, very, very similar movement. And last up for the hip hinge movements today, we've got the cable pull-throughs. You'll see those hips go back as far as I can. No extra flexing at the trunk. Just contract those hamstrings, squeeze those glutes, and thrust those hips forward. Just popping them forward, squeezing those glutes and hamstrings with great force. So again, the only difference is the physics. Here you're pulling the weight from back behind you, under your legs, just going to feel a little bit different in tension. Include those exercises in your overall training for variety, as well as these knee flexion exercises, which activate both the upper and the lower aspect of the hamstrings. And as I mentioned earlier, the short head of the bicep femoris only crosses the knee joint, so you really need to include some of these knee flexion exercises in order to activate those muscle fibers. So you can do the lying leg curl, seated leg curl, standing single leg curl, or one of the more challenging knee flexion exercises, the glute ham raise. So once again, notice that my upper body stays locked in place. I'm not doing any kind of flexing of the lower back. I'm keeping all the tension on my hamstrings. So I get nice straight out there, squeeze those hamstrings, and get myself right on up there. So again, include these exercises in your overall training and crush those hammies.